the newsagents.
So if you want to see 2.5% by 2030, vote Conservative. That's what we're going to give you. I think I'll leave it there.
Grant Shapps is making the case in the House of Commons today for this big leap in our increase in defence spending. But he's having to answer questions from Labour MPs who simply don't believe the money is really there.
There's no doubt that this is a hugely significant announcement about Britain hitting 2.5% of GDP by 2030. But will it ever happen? Is it just a way of creating a dividing line with the Labour Party when the Tories are so far behind in the polls? Welcome to the newsagents.
It's Emily.
It's John.
It's Lewis. You sound surprised to be there, John.
I was in another world there for a moment.
You're so excited about this announcement.
You were thinking of that horse bolting down the road.
Yeah,
clip,
exactly.
Clop, clip, clop.
Yeah. Honestly, London.
Yeah. What's going on?
What's going on?
All encircled now at Tobacco Dog, which is not something I expected to say on today's show.
That's breaking news.
That is breaking news. That is breaking news.
That's broken news because it happened about 6 hours ago.
Correct.
But we need to talk about the announcement yesterday that came from Rishi Sunak when he was in Poland and when he was with Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, that Britain would, by 2030, be spending 2.5% of GDP on defence to meet the new threats in the world, which are clear and present, particularly with kind of war in Europe, in Ukraine, the situation in the Middle East, the increasing militarization of China, and just the sense that the world feels a much more dangerous place.
Today is a landmark moment in the defence of the United Kingdom. This is a generational investment in British security and British prosperity. It makes us safer at home and stronger abroad. Now, we will have three immediate priorities for this new investment. First, we will put the UK's own defence industry on a war footing. One of the central lessons of the war in Ukraine is that we need deeper stockpiles of munitions and for industry to be able to replenish them more quickly. So today we're giving £10 billion in munitions support to give industry long-term funding certainty backed by long-term contracts so that they can produce more, be readier to surge capacity and to move to always-on production.
When he says put the UK defence industries on a war footing, I'm not entirely sure what that means. I mean, in the US, you've got the Defence Production Act, whereby the federal government says, right, you're going to stop making cars, you're going to start making tanks instead. And they did use that during COVID to say, right, you're going to stop doing certain things and you're going to start making ventilators instead. No one is suggesting any of that. So it's kind of unclear what the force of it is, apart from rhetorical.
I think there are two parts to this. I was speaking to people on the Defence Select Committee about what the war footing meant, and they said there's two things. One is a mindset issue. One is about saying we have to be less complacent about where Britain is at the moment. It's a wake-up call. And they said, we grew up in the Cold War era. Most of the generations that came after us have never had that sense of proximity to war. I don't know how real the Cold War really was for me, but the point they were making was that it's a bit of a, clap your hands, get on with it. This is actually happening whether you like it or not. The other thing is an intensely practical thing, which is, and this same person said, our shells don't fit into German guns, right? So if you've got armaments that don't actually fit with the kind of bullets or cartridges you're offering to Ukraine, then they're going to have a terrible time. They don't want to see the Ukrainians get one load of one thing and one load of another thing and not be able to put them together and actually defend themselves.
Come on, use the proper word. Interoperability.
Oh, you love this. God, I feel like I've got Harrison Ford just sitting
there.
You
are. So many vowels.
Okay.
Yeah, so many vowels.
Okay. So it's about the supply. It's about the supply chain, essentially. It's about the supply chain. If one widget is not available, what else do you put in there, right?
Yeah, and it does echo wider announcements and the sort of language that the government has been using, particularly this year. I mean, Grant Shapps himself has talked about the need to recognise that we're in a pre-war world rather than a post-war world, that the idea of conflict with Russia or another aggressor state is more likely. But I think there's two things to say about it. Is that one, I mean, if we're talking about rearmaments, I mean, maybe this is a conversation that should have happened some time ago. I mean, if we take Russia just as an example, Russia has moved its entire economy to a war footing. Now it has to, because it's literally actively at war. But in terms of I think the general consensus is within European kind of defence networks that Europe at least has been pretty sluggish in terms of moving to on the rearmament journey. And the second thing is, of course, is whether this announcement kind of really cuts it. And obviously there's been huge fanfare about the idea of, I think what did Sunak call it, a generational moment moving up to 2.5%. I think it's worth just reminding ourselves that NATO estimates we're due to spend this year 2.3% this year. So in real terms, what we're talking about is moving from 2.3% this year to 2.5% by 2030,
in 6 years,
assuming that it happens. So this is not a kind of massive, it's important, and it's an important signal, and NATO will appreciate that, but it's not a transformational moment in terms of defence spending. And the government has, entirely predictably, maybe legitimately, been making great hay about the big figures involved. This was Laura Trott on the Treasury Twitter account, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury.
We are increasing our defence spending to 2.5% of GDP, an increase of £75 billion over 6 years. This marks a significant moment in our country's defence. I'm here at Wellington Barracks in Westminster, headquarters of the 5-foot Guards regiments, the Coldstream, Grenadier, Irish, Scots and Welsh Guard, to explain what this means. We've always met our commitment to spend at least 2% on defence, making us one of the highest spending European countries. And we stood behind Ukraine after Putin's illegal invasion.
Great music for a start.
Oh,
Lovely,
please.
lovely.
Can I just make a plea now? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but can we just have ministerial statements without the most crap music bed you have ever heard?
Sound like
You're in the
supermarket
wrong-
sweep.
Wrong election year. I'm afraid we're going to get a lot more of that music. Oh, yes.
But the key bit was where she talked about it being a £75 billion increase over 6 years, right? This is pure sophistry. This is just nonsense figures, as the IFS and plenty of others have been pointing out this morning. It's only a £75 billion increase over 6 years if you assume that defence spending would otherwise have been completely flat over 6 years in cash terms, i.e. that there would have been real terms cuts to the defence budget over the next 6 years, which seems inconceivable. So if you actually assume that it would have gone up in real terms in each and every year, then basically you get to an extra £20 billion over 6 years. It's not nothing, but it's not £75 billion. And when you consider how weighty the defence needs could be over that time, it really won't go as far as you might think from the kind of tone and language of Shapps and Sunak today.
But, the interesting thing is that I understand that the Minister for Defence Procurement yesterday afternoon called in the big defence contractors in the UK and the defence sort of industry bodies for this meeting about the war footing and all the rest of it. And apparently a number of them were in the meeting thinking, yeah, all very interesting, but it's likely to be a Labour government that's going to be in power after the next general election in 6 months' time. And we're frankly much more interested in what their investment figures are going to be and what their targets are going to be. But the one thing that it did achieve was it brought very admiring glances from Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, who's come out and tweeted that this is very encouraging and a good thing what the British government have announced.
Yeah, and I think it does tie into the framework of Lord Cameron, Foreign Secretary, going to Mar-a-Lago, understanding in his chats with Donald Trump that he had to then take the message back to Europe that America wasn't just going to sort of sit there and pay up for all the defence, for all the spending to fight Russia through Ukraine. I think this is part of the whole narrative that they're trying to reset, that, we get it, we're going to pay our own way. But I think there's another thing, which is that when you say it's not very much, Lewis, 20 billion, is not 77 billion, fine, but it is still a hole at a time when they can't find 20 billion. They want to cut taxes. They also are already shrinking department states. And you've got this question over, I'm sorry, but where does that 20 billion come from? Now, I've been trying to sort of call around and work this out. And one person explained to me what they called the fat of the department, right? That over COVID, departments got fat. And that, they
Like the
had
rest of the nation.
Well, exactly. Very drunk
Speak for
most
yourself.
evenings as well. But I guess they're talking about this idea that they've got to lose the weight in a post-COVID era. Now, even if they're talking about 72,000 civil servants being laid off, and quite frankly, have we really got like 72,000 post-COVID people in their job at the Foreign Office or whatever hanging about. I mean, extraordinary if that's true. But I'm still not sure that gets us up to 20 billion.
Over 6 years.
I mean, what you hear in Grant Shapps' response, and each time I've listened quite carefully, he says part of it, very, very rushed, part of it will be paid for by part of it. And so I don't think we are yet hearing the breakdown of where that extra money, minimal as you say it may be, is going to come from.
There is a reason why Labour have not matched it today. They have not matched the pledge. Their previous pledge had been that they want to get to 2.5% when the economic conditions allow. And they haven't. I suspect they probably will end up matching it for political reasons, if nothing else. But there is a reason they haven't rushed out to match it, which is that they know that what this probably means, because there's stuff you can do around civil service headcount. There's always money that can be shuffled around, but it is although it's not 75 billion, 20 billion is not nothing, particularly in fiscally constrained circumstances. So what it almost certainly means is more cuts to unprotected departments over and above those which are basically already implied in Jeremy Hunt's baseline assumptions and the OBR's baseline assumptions, which are already substantial because of the tax cuts that Hunt has introduced. So basically it makes the net result of today, as necessary as these measures might be, is it would make Labour or an incoming Labour government's room for manoeuvre even tighter.
So that's why I think you have to look at it. Yes, it is significant. Yes, Britain spending 2.5% at a time when Donald Trump may become the next president and demanding that European nations stump up more money. It is significant. But it is also a political play. It is also trying to frame this as a bit of a trap for Labour, saying, are you going to match it? And then when they say, yeah, we'll match it, well, where's the money coming from? And it is a sort of asymmetry, isn't it? That the Conservative government have announced this. We've also had Jeremy Hunt saying, I want to abolish national insurance contributions, which is a huge tax commitment.
46 billion.
Yeah. Well, hang on. Where's the money coming from? How are you filling this black hole of an extra 20 billion for defence and an extra 46 billion to get rid of national insurance? Please tell us. And it's not an unreasonable question to ask. Yet for some reason, that question gets asked to Labour shadow chancellors much more than it does get asked to Tory chancellors.
Yeah, because it's a perfect statement to come out with 10 days before the local elections. As you said, Lewis, where was this money in 2014 when Putin was invading Ukraine for the first time? Crimea, the Donbass, all the rest of it. Where was it at the start of 2022 when it became clear and obvious that Ukraine was going to be fighting a war on our part, right? A proxy war, essentially. I mean, one minister put it to me, we're already at war with Russia. We're just doing it through Ukraine. It's not that anything changed 1 week before the local elections, except for, the local elections.
Yeah. It's also worth bearing in mind as well just how parlous a state the Ministry of Defence's finances are in, even before all of this. I mean, there's an MOD report out about a month ago, MOD Parliamentary Select Committee report, I should say, which said that the MOD faces a £17 billion deficit in its plans to equip the military over the next 10 years, warned that figure could grow by another £12 billion, said that the government had no plan to address it. And it's also worth bearing in mind just in the politics. And again, it's not to detract from the fact that I do think the most important thing about today is, as much as anything, and Blinken has alluded to this, the signal that it sends to other European countries. And that is important. I don't wish to demean it, but it is worth remembering as well that in the Conservative manifesto of 2019, they actually pledged to increase defence spending by 0.5 percentage point in real terms every single year, which they failed to do. And Boris Johnson actually announced in July 2022, in the dog days of his administration, that we would increase defence spending to 2.5%. So in a sense, it is re-announcing what Boris Johnson had said in the middle of the Parliament. Again, it's not to detract from it, but it is worth just remembering that the government's record on defence is a checkered one.
I guess it's very hard, isn't it, to sell defence in retail terms. I mean, people love the theory of defence. Do you feel that your country is keeping you safe? Of course.
They love hospital beds even more.
Exactly. They quite like teachers. They quite like hospital beds. They quite like a cuts in the queue. They quite like somebody helping them with the cost of living. When it comes to defence, I wonder if you actually polled people. People would say it, but would they vote for it? I'm not sure.
Just as a kind of a comparison, Russia is now spending 16% of all government spending on defence.
They're also conscripting their kids. I'm not sure I want that.
Oh no, I'm not. No, but it shows the extent to which Russia is
prepared to win.
When you talk about a war footing, Russia is on a war foot.
And
not on the widgets, is
Poland's
it?
spending 4%, US spends 3.5%. And again, Britain is in the upper tier. There are plenty of European
Totally.
countries that don't spend nearly as much, and will go up the table
It might just
again.
be that what they're doing is throwing down the gauntlet to governments like
That's right.
Italy, Maloney, who cozies up to Zelensky and says we'll do everything in our power, and then quietly slashes her own Italian defence
And
budget.
that's important, right? Because we've been saying on this show and hearing from plenty of experts as well who are saying and have said that Europe needs to wake up to the possibility of a Trump restoration, and Europe might need to take a far more active interest in its own defence. And so in that context, it's welcome.
Yeah.
But it's a drop in the ocean, relatively.
We'll be back after the break with Angela Rayner having a good pop at the Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden. So at this morning's editorial meeting, which is incredibly highbrow, I'm at home eating my muesli. Emily's
I
just
can
about
always
to
hear
go
your toast.
I'm off toast at the moment.
Muesli.
Yeah, it was muesli. And
There
Emily's
was
And I'm
just
in
great-
bed.
Great
Emily's
thoughtful
just back
pauses.
from a run.
Yeah.
Emily's been up since 5 o'clock in the morning, running
Yeah.
with Moody, and
And I've
Lewis
just
is
woken
just
up.
coming round.
Yeah.
And we did
It's all
discuss.
great convo.
And we did discuss. Okay, Prime Minister's questions.
Yeah.
It's Rayner versus Dowden today.
What would you do?
What is Angela Rayner
And
going
I said,
to go on?
oh, well, nobody's going to talk about housing today, are they? She's not going to mention housing. How wrong I was.
And I listened to Emily Maitlis and went on live radio and said exactly the same thing with James O'Brien on LBC.
So you
Oh.
must
To which
have-
James O'Brien then said you're going to have to eat some
The
humble
power,
pie.
the
I know.
power
I had
I
to say, well, you
have.
wouldn't know about it, would you, James? But anyway, that's a separate story.
Did you eat humble pie? Because I'd quite like to have seen that as well.
Yeah, well, just a slice, just a morsel, John.
Well, let's anyway hear how Angela Rayner kicked off.
I know the party opposite is desperate to talk about my living arrangements. But the public want to know what this government is going to do about theirs.
Quite brave. I think the civil servant's term is that. She clearly was thinking, do I try and avoid it, evade it, or do I walk straight into it? And she just put it down there. Yeah, you're all obsessing about mine. Why don't you obsess about the voters' housing instead? Although I did think she sounded quite nervous, like she didn't really want to be there.
I think she was nervous, but to be honest, I think it was a gamble that she and her team obviously decided to take, because obviously, and I think a normal politician in that circumstance, they try and keep it quiet. They try and ask something very non-controversial, and they know that their opponent's going to come back with it, but you just have a line prepared. They took a gamble that Dowden would basically fold like a pack of cards because he wasn't able to get his pre-prepared lines out because she'd already addressed it, and that is exactly what happened.
I don't think it
Dowden
was.
completely flailed. I
don't think he did. I thought he
Really?
kept coming back to her and saying, we're literally talking about that bill today. And can I just remind you, we're talking about that bill
But
today.
what he wasn't able to do, which is like in that situation, the ideal for him is to be able to put to her a question that she then obviously doesn't answer, and it's useful in terms of the case against her. And it was clear that he had a kind of an order of things that he wanted to get to and a set number of reports. And by confronting it early on, okay, it's not ideal because it's a running sore for her, but it basically was extremely effective. And actually, she managed to, most PMQs jokes, as we know, are only 1% are genuinely funny, but she actually did manage to tell one that was genuinely funny.
Go on.
And we all know, though, Mr. Speaker, the one reform that the Right Honourable Lady would not abolish from Margaret Thatcher, the right to buy your council house.
Angela Rayner.
Mr. Speaker, I was expecting a little bit better from him today. He seems to be a bit worn out. Maybe it's the 3 a.m. calls from the bad men that have been keeping him up at night.
He also had quite a good line earlier where he said, we've been doing this stand-in so often, if we do it one more time, she'll probably start calling it her principal residence. But
Yeah, that wasn't a bad
the
joke.
trouble is that from both of them, they do sound very staged. You can hear the writer in the back, can't you?
But it is all
It's
stage,
all
isn't it?
stage.
Of course. But I think that in a way, though, whether how well or badly Dowden responded to it, I do think Rayner did show today precisely why she has so many enemies and why they come for her, which is that she's an unusual politician. She is effective. A lot of her opponents struggle to deal with her, and she's unpredictable. And I suspect and predict that as a result of today, where I think there's no doubt that she certainly emerged, let's at the very minimum say she emerged unscathed, which given everything that's going on, ain't no small achievement, or mean achievement, the focus and efforts against her in certain elements of the press, however legitimate or legitimate they are, and I actually think she doesn't have said for right. I think there are some questions that she's been pretty opaque about, not necessarily the most important things in the world, but she could have been more transparent. I think those efforts will be redoubled this weekend in the Sunday papers.
I think the other thing about it was that it all seemed a bit of a game. And if you are trying to bring down the deputy leader of the Labour Party because you think that this scandal is so large, and it was all done in such a jokey, sort of clubby kind of way that I'm going to lightly rib you and you're going to lightly rib me back. It just sort of, this is not serious. I mean, it didn't feel like serious politics.
I think it's because he has a real tough time, because he is a posh boy, slightly oleaginous, and he knows he's
not that posh. That's the funny thing. He's not? No, but he just sounds. He's just done.
Okay,
the
he sounds
Tory
it.
thing.
He sounds like he's been very cautious because he knows he's talking to a working class woman.
Yes, they
and so I think that's the imbalance, that he has to be slightly more jovial or slightly more sort of generous almost than he might be feeling, because he doesn't want the headline to be what a misogynist pig.
I don't know. I think she just completely floored him. I think she just concluded that the best defence was the best. It was an offence, and that's what
let's hear the last line.
Was brilliant. I can see that.
I read with interest that the right honourable gentleman has been urging his neighbour in number 10 to call an election because he's worried they might get wiped out. Has he finally realised that when he stabbed Boris Johnson in the back to get his mate into number 10, he was ditching their biggest election winner for a pint-sized loser?
Let's come to pint-sized loser in a minute, but I've just seen someone retweeting that approvingly. Who?
Nadine
Doris.
Wasn't it her line? I'm pretty sure it was her line. Yeah, I think she used. Yeah, it was.
Well, there's
she came
probably
up with
quite a lot of cheers on the Tory backbenches
so
to
the
that
kind
one.
of the line that
With friends
draws
like
unity between Angela Rayner and Nadine Dorries is one of the more unexpected developments in British politics right now.
I haven't heard Labour actually praising Boris Johnson, even in his electoral role, actually in his campaigning role.
Well, it's interesting, yeah. I mean, that certainly wasn't the line back in July 2022 when they were trying to get rid of him. But occasionally it's been said about Rayner that in a weird way, and she wouldn't appreciate this comparison, and I certainly don't think it's true in lots of ways in terms of her behaviour and probity and all that stuff. But people have occasionally said that she's kind of Labour's Boris Johnson. She's a sort of form of Labourism in person that is really powerful, evocative, and she can get away with things. She can say things that other politicians can't get away with. And I think it's true to say that, you know, if in PMQs a different politician, maybe it would be a man, maybe it would be a sort of posh Tory boy, if Dowden had got up and used an equivalent kind of pretty insulting, I mean, just objectively, right? It's not nice. It's pretty playground stuff. If they'd gone up and said that, there'd be sort of Twitter uproar and everything. But because it's Rayner, certainly a big sort of part of the culture will go good on her. Brilliant. And it was a funny line.
It is fun. What we're really laughing about is pint-size just mean being small.
He's just a small man.
Is that
a little man.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
But that is, again, it will get picked up by the tabs. It's going to echo around the internet. And that is where she's very effective. Yeah. Because normal polite society says, oh, you can't height shame him, you can't fat shame him, you can't this shame him.
Apparently.
But if you're Angela Rayner, you can get away with it and everyone laughs.
There's an interesting thing to it as well, which is, my understanding is that, and this doesn't always happen when she fills in, but the parts of Starmer's team were advising her and helping her on PMQs today who normally advise Starmer, and that isn't always the case when she fills in. So it is an indication that there is still a significant effort from the Starmer side of things and from the leader's office to support the deputy, which, you know, in different circumstances
I wonder
may
if
not
that
be the
explains
case.
why she was slightly nervous, because she's sort of using other people's lines.
But
it was also higher risk, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was higher risk to go in and confront the issue up front rather than wait to have to respond to the attack that you knew would be coming.
As sort of media people, we always encourage people to do that, don't we? Like, take the upper ground, go in on the offensive, do the attack. People rarely do. People always know they should and they rarely do, and I suppose that was quite gutsy.
I mean, there is no doubt that the Tory benches really dislike Rayner. They always have, ever since the scum comment in particular. You know, she
funny that you don't
that.
like being called scum.
Well, it is funny that. I mean, she apologised for that, but yes. And there is no, you know, like sometimes when a politician's in trouble on the other side, there is a little bit more sort of residual support. There is none on the Tory side. And like I say, in terms of the kind of redoubling of efforts to get her, today's performance will have intensified that dynamic.
But not liking her is one thing. But I bet you equally there is a recognition that she is formidable. Loathsome though she might be, but she is formidable and a very effective campaigner.
Completely. That's why they want to get rid of her.
New at 11, a bill that could ban TikTok here in the U.S. is now headed to President Biden's desk for his signature. Hours ago, the Senate passed the bill, legislation that could ultimately disrupt the lives of countless people who use the app to make a living.
In this completely divided Congress, something suddenly got done, and it got done so fast. It was sort of whiplash. it was just to explain part of a big funding bill that saw money going to Ukraine and to Israel and to Taiwan as well. And they just sort of snuck in this bit at the end, which was, and we're going to ban TikTok. Sorry? What? Sorry? Oh, we're going to ban TikTok unless the Chinese owners sell it.
And they've got a year to do that. So ByteDance, the Chinese owners of TikTok, have got to sell it as a separate company to a US company. Otherwise, it gets banned. Which, to use the civil servants code, that's a very courageous move. Because, there are 170 million Americans who use TikTok, who really like TikTok. And broadly speaking, in an election year, you don't take away from voters the things that they really, really like. And yet, that would appear to be what the government is on course to do.
Well, particularly when you consider, not just something voters really like in an election year, but something that is used more and more by both the Biden and Trump campaigns, both of whom have in the past actually been a little more reluctant to use it. Biden has only recently started using it, but to great effect. Trump used to be really hostile to it because of its connections with China. Suddenly now he's got a big following on it. Weirdly enough, Trump has discovered that maybe he's not quite as...
Are you saying that Trump has got flexible beliefs, and if it helps Trump, he believes it?
I'm basically like a yoga guy, John. I'm so flexible.
Essentially, this is about the allegation that the app's whole algorithm can be altered to promote pro-Chinese, pro-Beijing content, i.e. not just China, but the Chinese state, the government. And they think that essentially TikTok's being used to hide criticism of Beijing over human rights and similar issues like that, and to even influence the outcome of elections. So that's why it's not just a kind of, it's not just a commercial interest thing. It's not just sort of trust interest. It's about whether American legislators believe that TikTok is spying on its people.
Well, we've had
it's a Huawei story.
We've had Alicia Kearns, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, in here before, telling us that we as journalists shouldn't have it on our phones. And that's her belief and concern. So it's not unique to the US, the concern about it.
Yeah. It's also, though, a very theoretical concern that this is something that the Chinese government could do. TikTok says they couldn't. They don't have access to the data, and that they would not be able to do that. And they also point to a lot of foreign ownership of the company as well. But look, it's undoubtedly true that TikTok now finds itself in a precarious position in terms of...
It has to prove that it doesn't, or more than that, has to sell.
There is a mighty legal action that's going to ensue now, isn't there? Which is going to be around the idea of you can't ban a single company exercising First Amendment rights. This is free speech, and you're just singling out one company for not very good reasons for doing it, whereas there are other companies as well that have got kind of video sharing platforms and all the rest of it, which are going to be allowed to go scot-free. And so I think...
Well, you come after the king, don't you?
Yeah, but when something becomes the law of the land in the UK, that's it sort of settled. Whereas in the US, that's just the start of litigation. And the litigation will go on for a very long time.
Do you know what? I'm still thinking about those horses. 7 horses.
Maybe they were startled by the new honours given to the members of the royal family last night.
Oh, not this again. John's very upset, everybody, that John has once again cruelly been overlooked for the companion of the band.
I want to know what the Grand Order of Bath is.
The order... The chair of the
mini
Scottish
Order
Thistle.
of Bath.
Can't you get your daughter to give you an honour or something? The order of the bathtub or something. Whatever. Yeah, gold star.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Next year.
A gold star on the fridge for when I come home.
Whilst we're talking about the monarchy, we should just tell you about our US edition, which has no mention of the monarchy whatsoever.
What a segue.
What a segue. That was seamless. Maitlis at the top of her game there.
Thank you. I'll take a bow. Talk about the monarchy. Right. It's News Agency USA, and you can find that on our other feed. And we talk about
TikTok a bit more.
We talk about arming teachers in schools with guns.
It's mad. Tennessee have just passed the law on it.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
The News Agents. This is a Global Player original podcast.